First off, if you haven't already downloaded the app, shame on you, because we're in the second day. So download it now, because that's where you can do the session survey. Please do that survey. Helps MarkLogic, also helps the speakers as well with the information you provide, and you will be entered into a drawing for an Amazon gift card, which you could win for doing that. Next, please mute your devices. So out of respect for the speaker, please mute them now. And then lastly, this session is a 25-minute session, so we're going to hold questions to the end. And if you don't have your question answered, Donnie will be available to answer those questions after the session. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Sutkamp, who will introduce Donnie.
Good morning, everybody. So I have the distinct pleasure this morning of introducing Donnie Maddox from Great American Insurance. I have the privilege of working with him and his team. Donnie's leading their data modernization initiative across their enterprise, which is composed of 35 lines of business. So a pretty complex set of data challenges that they've got to go through. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Donnie.
Yep. Thank you, Dave. Guys, is that good in the back? Is everything coming through okay? Very good. All right, so thank you very much for being here. My name is Donnie Maddox. I'm the AVP of Data Engineering and Software Development. I think I'm going to also try to add Returner of Professional Ping Pong Player Serve to that title. I did get the card last night. That was fantastic. So that was the highlight of my event. And so honestly, what this title means is I do a lot of talking about data engineering and modernization, but I'm backed up by a fantastic engineering and architectural team. They're in the crowd. It was mandatory that they attend to ensure that at least 5 to 6 people were here. So, all right, here we go. So I spent my entire career with Great American Insurance. Started as a junior developer right out of college, fell in love with the problem set, fell in love with our company culture, and it just kind of kept going from there. I spent the first 18 years in software development, building policy admin systems, and then last year I moved over to our data space to try to help with our data modernization program. Okay, here's some of the legal slides that had to be added, and please read them in detail. All right, so all I wanted to do today is just tell our story a little bit. Okay, my hope is that by sharing this story, it might create a thought, give an idea, or if nothing else, confirm that, confirm that we're not, too far out in the left field with what we're dealing with, okay? And so here we go. I always like to tell our story and the story of insurance with a little bit of history. It used to be so simple. This was our IT department in the mid-'70s, right? We issued policies on typewriters, and it was fantastic. Think of miles and miles of filing cabinets with pieces of paper, and that's what we did. But in the middle of that going on, everybody knows that somewhere in the IT industry, other things were happening. Technology was starting to become part of how people were doing business. And about a decade later, sure enough, it infiltrated our company as well as the insurance industry. And we had these fantastic things called dumb terminals. It was an electronic typewriter, but it was amazing. This was a huge innovation in the world of insurance, okay? But again, during that time frame, other things are happening in technology. And so, like many other industries, we're not always on the bleeding edge, and so sometimes technology doesn't get interwoven until a bit later. And so, sure enough, in the 90s, now we have this, we've made these major investments in mainframe platforms, and the leaders in the mid-90s, of course, they're now adding new capabilities, new functionality, all of these things. Your core processing is happening through mainframe systems. We're adding rules and just more functionality to our business customers and to our corporate offices. But in the mid-90s, things are starting to change more rapidly. Keep in mind that in 1995, someone Google this and check me, but I believe Java 1.0 was released in 95. Okay? So there was no way in the mid-90s for those sorts of technologies to make their way into foundational systems yet. They were happening, we were learning about it in universities, but they hadn't made it into the financial industry yet. And so you have all of this data, all of this core business operation happening on systems that were built, about 10 years prior. Somewhere in the 2000s, we start thinking about the idea of maybe it's time to start moving some functionality off the mainframe. We start bringing in tools like Oracle. We're starting to move away from DB2, and you start bringing data warehouses and certain back-end functions off the mainframe, and it was a great idea, and we were really excited. And then we also start building web applications for the very first time. This is exciting. I mean, if I think in 2002, like I said, I think it was 1998 that Java version .2 was created, and just a few years later, companies in the insurance space are starting to move into that area. And so systems are being created, but keep in mind, the leaders at that time over that project, they had a choice to make. They could either do a 6-month project dabbling in these brand new web technologies, or they could have a 5-year program to replace everything that's been created since. Everything that we've been taught in computer science says, please reuse your code as much as you can. And so in those moments, we make decisions and we keep reusing code because in the moment it's the right thing to do. Then we start building more systems, and we do try to bypass things that have been built 10 years prior. And we start building web apps, and we have web services, and we're doing all of these things, and we decide that an enterprise data warehouse is the way to go. And it was extremely powerful in the moment. And we were really excited, and the promise was, if every system hits the enterprise model, everything behind it will magically work. Now, as it turns out, the promise was true, but it came at a cost, and that cost was complexity. Okay? The people who had to understand the giant schema in the middle had to be experts in everything to do with insurance. Everything. When you cobble up every single thing that we do with insurance data and you try to merge it into one super schema, there's only like 5 or 6 people that could actually engage that problem. Okay? And so what happens is, as the insurance industry and the technology industry are starting to shift, and more of the systems that we're integrating into our ecosystem are off-the-shelf products rather than home-built systems where we can kind of cheat and make sure the APIs match, it gets harder and harder to integrate into that system because we can't always get access to the experts. I don't know if you deal with this or not, but if you've ever thought about systems as you kind of move to that second generation of technical talent, sometimes we forget why we did things a certain way. We know how it works, but we forget why. And so when things like this happen, it's not just technical components. There are people and processes that get wrapped up into this machine, and it gets really hard to get out of it. But it is highly efficient, right? But it's difficult and highly complex, okay? And oftentimes in our world, maybe in yours, sometimes you have to fall back to that very first system that was ever created as your most basic integration option, okay? and it happens, right? And so for us, the technical change, I just drew the picture, but what we're really wanting to do is, instead of focusing on a super schema in the middle, right, that where you bring all of your geniuses together and create the one super schema that is perfect and will handle everything there is to handle, what we decided to do was, by taking advantage of what MarkLogic can do for us, just bring the data in. And then let's focus on our back-end systems independently. So let's go solve our financials problem. As it turns out, financials by itself isn't that complicated. Let's go solve our billing integration problems, right? Billing by itself is relatively easy. In the insurance industry, we have to do statutory reporting to the government. We have to make sure that we send out all of our all the coverages we write, how much premiums, to make sure that we're operating with fair practices and all of those things. That was the piece that I was afraid of when we started down this path. Okay, luckily some of our engineers on the team were not afraid of it, and we discovered that we could take the top existing process that takes data and manipulates it almost 10 times. And we took it down to one step. Because when we started peeling away all of the complexity, it turned out that the output on the far right, the thing that was our target, strangely enough, it looked a whole lot like the message coming in the very front. But we translated it 10 times, and then we plugged in queries, and we plugged in people, and we plugged in paperwork and documentation and process to make the existing process work, and it worked. But when we had the ability to dive in and just kind of move away all of those other moving parts, and we just asked the question, what's the right answer? And it turns out we just kind of looked at it and said, well, it's very similar to this right here. And guys that were on the project, please correct me, but I think we went from the pink process, and in 3 days we had a working prototype that had about 50% of the right answer coming out, plus some other things that the people actually wanted. And so, that's a glimpse of some of the power that we got. It's what the tool brings to our problem set that when you put those two together, it was a really powerful solution for us. I'll also talk about, just in general, one of the key things, and look at this example. I don't know if you have examples like it or not, but for us, that existing process represented many unique technical skill sets, right? So to solve the problem, the amount of hours wasn't the problem, right? If you could find all 15 people that you needed at the same time, stick them in a room, would only take a handful of hours. But think from a logistical standpoint, you have not one of these projects, but you have 50 of these projects, and you might only have 3 people that can do step 7. All right, so the planning logistics becomes really interesting there. And so one of our great challenges, and one of the things that we set out to prove, is that by utilizing a technology like MarkLogic, for us, it wasn't about just going faster. It was about simplicity. I was really glad most of the keynotes, it's all about simplicity. And for us, it wasn't just simplifying the picture. It was simplifying the number of unique things you need to make the machine work. And what that does for us is it allows more people to be a part of the solution, right? We've been able to onboard developers onto our program within days rather than months. We would bring developers in, and on their first day, they were implementing code, okay, through pairing and various other agile practices. But that's It's part of the power that the tool brings to us. It gives us that opportunity to let multiple people play a role in these sorts of solutions. What we believe that will do for us, again, I tried to sell this to the group. They kept, the leadership team, they kept asking, how much faster is it going to be? And what I had to explain to them is that if you compare Project 1 the old way versus Project 1 the new way, it might be a little bit faster. If Project 1 is fully staffed and Project 1 is fully staffed and you compare the two, they might be roughly the same. The difference is with the flexibility and the simplicity that MarkLogic helps bring to our ecosystem. Without increasing headcount, we have the ability to staff many more threads of implementations because more people can participate. When I was talking about like all of the different consumers that we have, right? We have people that are new to insurance that we can ask them to go analyze the billing integration, right? It's something that a junior analyst or a junior technician can wrap their minds around. When I ask them to think just about financials, right? It's a little complex, but it's not overwhelming. And you can actually teach those things and you can bring people up to speed and let them grow and expand their knowledge of the insurance space on a reasonable path. When you have the superstructure and you ask that person to participate, they really have nothing to add. They're always bound to the expert, right? And so this is what we believe is going to happen in our space. It's not about comparing Project 1 to Project 1. It's about recognizing that we will be able to scale at a level that just isn't possible with our current setup. Okay? Now, I'm going to give a couple of thoughts of things that worked for us. The abstract said that it was best practices. I don't know if that's true or not. We kind of figured them out as we went. So if they're best practices, that's fantastic. Okay? Now, what I discovered was that, and it might just be due to the role that I play, but the cultural change to me was more difficult than the technical change. Now, it could be because we have a powerful product that we're bringing to the table. It could be because I've got a fantastic engineering team. It could be that when you have long-standing processes and practices and people are tied to those things, right? These aren't just computer systems. There are jobs and roles and all sorts of things that are wired in to everything that we build. And so I'll just give a couple of thoughts. You may agree, disagree, and that's great. I'd love to talk to you more about it, but I hope this sparks something. This is one that I consider of utmost importance because some of those old systems in the earlier silly pictures with the mainframe and various things, I was lucky enough that in my first 2 years with the company, my mentors were the people who built those. And as a technician, I find it absolutely amazing that they were able to solve problems with the tools that they had at their disposal. It's absolutely amazing. And so I would highly encourage teams to, when they are considering on helping take your ecosystem steps down the road, please don't hammer the systems that you're hoping to enhance or replace. If you want those people to come to the table and be a part of moving forward, hold their achievements of the past, hold them up on a pedestal. It is one of my absolute pet peeves for the person to come in, look at the last 15 years of architecture, oh, well, you should have done this. Well, you weren't there. You weren't there. And by the way, the technology you're recommending didn't come out 10 years ago. And so it's a pet peeve of mine. Make sure that those individuals, I hold the people who were nice enough to mentor me, I hold them in very high esteem as well as the systems that they built. The second one, know where to focus. know where to focus, and I would also suggest know what not to do, okay? For us, we had early debates about potentially interacting and maybe adjusting our financial systems, our financial engines, and it's probably a big win for us if we choose to do it. For our first implementation, we chose to stay away from it. It was, for us, it was a little on the scary side. Financials was such core of what we do in insurance. We decided to kind of hold that piece steady and see if we could move in some maybe less volatile, or not volatile, but less critical areas, okay? Number 3, find other projects that can be accelerated and kind of ride the coattails, okay? For us, we have an ongoing mainframe retirement initiative, okay? There's a ton of those opportunities that you can kind of interweave into this story. And our architecture team, they do a fantastic job of going out and finding other opportunities, right? And every once in a while, it really makes us mad because we discover that someone added another 10 projects to the backlog when we haven't got the first one done yet. But that's what you have to do. You've got to push that a little bit. You need, what we discovered in our culture, you need executive support. I need it from IT, I needed it from our business side executives, because the people that are being impacted by this change that are on the ground, sometimes they're all in and sometimes they're not, okay? There were some very difficult and challenging weeks. I mean, these are big things, okay? And so make sure you have the support, okay? If you're gonna go after, for us, we tried to go after core operations, policies and claims. It's the heart of what we do. If you're going to do that, you better have some backup, okay? All right? Stakeholder engagement, small groups. I don't know if you guys ever have meetings of 50. You ever have the committees of 50, you know, where everybody has to agree and everyone has a veto? Those are terrible. Meet in small groups. And the biggest reason why I suggest that is you can easily get to the heart of the problem. What does this group care about? When we meet with our catastrophe modeling group, you know, they handle all of the hurricane modeling and all of those sorts of things, really cool technology. And we meet with them only to discover they need a handful of things. And I don't have to interweave that conversation with the conversation about insurance actuarials, right, which is a highly complicated thing, right? Keep those things separated and really try to understand each individual consumer. And I would suggest solve the real problem and try to measure success. For us, it was complexity. It wasn't about going faster. That was the original question, how can we go faster? But the problem we had was complexity. Speed and throughput was a symptom. Complexity was our problem. And if we hadn't dove in and figured that out early, we might have been trying to sell the wrong story. And then we might have discovered that we didn't really answer the question in the end. And so it was very important for us when we discovered that complexity was our problem, and we went and shared that story with our business partners, and we would share with them, hey, part of the reason your project isn't getting started is because we don't have enough of this type of a person or this sort of a thing. Okay? They got it, right? We weren't talking about all kinds of technical wizardry. It was, your project isn't getting started. And that spoke to them, and we were able to share that piece of the story. Guys, that was our story and a little bit about insurance and that sort of thing. I'm going to open the floor up to questions, comments, or snide remarks or anything of that nature. I think we've got probably 5-6 minutes, and I'm happy to meet afterwards. Okay.
Hi, can you speak a little bit about the presentation layer? What kind of changes you needed to do based on what your front end BI apps looked like in the legacy world as compared to when you brought things over into MarkLogic?
Okay. I'll speak a little bit about it, and I will tell you that we are still a little bit in flux with that. We're trying to figure out how those two are going to marry up. With our particular problem space that we're looking at, most of the finish line systems, they're really not running BI products. I mean, these are like canned regulatory type reports that are chiseled in stone. And so there's not a whole lot of that type of activity going on. However, we have a whole other group in our organization that is starting to look at and break down what we want to do with analytics and BI. And so there are some other things happening there. We believe this is going to play a major role. I was hoping you were going to ask me about ping pong. Man. He returned the serve last night too, I saw him.
So you talked about 360 executive support, and you had a
Yeah.
line in there about asking your data modeler if a document store was the
Yeah.
right approach. Could you talk a little more about that?
Well, I kind of look at it this way. Just think socially, for example, if you have someone whose sole job is to draw pictures of database tables and relational models, I'm gonna take a guess that they may not be a fan of flexible document ingestion. It turns out that half of my team is the data modeling team. And so it's an interesting little thing. And the reason I throw that in there is, for us, we have a fantastic culture in our company, and we always try to remember that these aren't just technical things. Right? These are people. These are our team members that we care about. And when you think about things like, well, I don't want to draw that picture anymore. It's unnecessary. Well, what if you had an entire team of people that for 15 years they were highly important because that skill was absolutely required before implementations could even start? Documentation, right? We have conversations around what level of documentation do we create, right? And you get into the whole agile and iterative development, and do I create documentation up front, or should I just wait until later and discover what people actually need, right? I've had those arguments many times. And so I throw that out there only to share that when you are moving this direction, if you're going to take this journey, there's going to be people who may disagree with you, but their disagreement may not be rooted in the technical. It might be personal. It might be, they may be thinking of their families. They may be thinking of what their role could be going forward, right? And so I just suggest that to you. It's something that we noticed and that we're conscious of. I'm waiting for easy questions from our great American people.
Yeah.
They're not raising their hands, though.
Can you describe what you're using MarkLogic for,
Sure.
and if you're doing
Sure.
any financial and regulatory reporting out of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me see if I can get back to this guy right here. So, this is a picture of our entire world, but the area that we are focusing on is what we call our core operations. Every insurance company does policy, claims, and reinsurance. And on the other side, we have to do financials, billing, statutory reporting. Any of those core functions, if they don't exist, you don't really have an insurance company. It is mandated. For our first implementation, I take that back. For about a year, our architecture team led some application enhancements and acceleration POCs using MarkLogic. Then it was presented to us, could we use MarkLogic in core operations? So this is kind of our second road that we're plowing. And we tried to determine, could we take in policy messages, claims messages, reinsurance messages, and have them harmonized and merged in a more simplistic fashion. And so that's what we're trying to do. The very first major technical question that was asked of us is, if we have a third-party off-the-shelf policy admin system, can we take their native messages into MarkLogic and use them? Because if we do that, it cuts out thousands of hours of integration work. XML schema creation, database table creation, design, modeling, implementation, the whole 9 yards. And I think once we got a good message, a couple of days, we had it in there. A couple weeks later, we discovered, sure enough, we had most everything we needed. We did have to have the messages enhanced a little bit to give us everything we needed for the back end. But that's what we're trying to use it for.
Okay, well, we're at the top of the hour, so that's all the questions we're going to take. But thank you, Donnie, and thank you, everybody, for attending.